terrorist attack on Moscow raised a lot of question among the experts that they are talking about it was Ukrainian, it was ISIS. The United States was pushing for the concept that ISIS was behind this terrorist attack. I want to know what's your take on this and how did you find it?
Well, I found it very odd that the United States, in shorter than an hour, within an hour, knew two things. One, it wasn't Ukraine. It wasn't Ukraine. And two, it was ISIS. It was that nebulous sort of entity out there that we call ISIS-K or something like that, you know. How do they know all that stuff within an hour? I don't know. I'm afraid to ask. But doesn't that betray a certain defensiveness, if at the very least? Now, I've looked at what information is available. The key things, of course, are what Putin said in that major address. Excuse me here, I should have gotten rid of that. In the major address the day after the attacks, what he said was, we got them. We got all four of the perpetrators. They're on their way to Ukraine. Actually, they were within 100 kilometers of Ukraine at the time. And so we know that they were given kind of a window, a little place in Ukraine to come in, and that speaks of contacts. There were arrangements made. Now, Putin was typically restrained but strong, saying we're going to find these people and we're going to punish them no matter who was involved. So he didn't blame it on Ukraine right off the bat, but it's pretty clear that what he was saying is, hey, these people were headed for Ukraine. They had contacts, so we're looking into it, and they will. Now, having all four of these folks is going to give them a pretty good window into who orchestrated this thing and hopefully who knew about it. Because if, as seems likely, the Ukrainians orchestrated this thing, it is altogether possible that the British and the American security services knew about it. And if that's the case, and we didn't share that information with the Russians, which they claim we didn't do, that's really as bad as it gets, because even in the tightest times, even in the most hostile times, security services have passed this kind of information. In one case, I remember very explicitly, from America to Russia, and avoided a terrorist attack, for which Putin publicly thanked the CIA for alerting him. So if they had that information, and this time they didn't give the details that they had, now it could be that they had no details, but at least they had the information, and the Russians are claiming that it was not given to them. The other thing is that I just saw a video clip of Budanov. Now, Budanov is the head of the military intelligence operation, which includes covert action, which includes terrorism. He's been unbashful about admitting the kinds of things that they do, and he's been very proud. Now, he was asked by a BBC interviewer just, I guess, today. I came by chance. Now, how do you feel? How do you feel about what happened? This terrible thing where 133 plus people killed, 100 so. Yes, I feel very happy about that. Why is that? Well, I just feel very good about that. I think that will be just what is ordered. Do you think that there will be more such attacks? Of course there will. Yes, there will be. Even deeper into Russia. Oh, thank you very much, Mr. Budanov. Now, Budanov is a really interesting guy. He's a general, but his whole experience is in covert action, in incidents such as happened in Moscow. Besides that, when Victoria Nuland was in Kiev 3 weeks ago, maybe it was a month ago now, she met with all these folks, right? And she picked who would be the head of the army and who would go as ambassador to London. And Zelensky, Zaluzhny, and Sirsky, and Budanov. Well, Budanov was slated to become head of the armed forces, but clearly they thought he had a more important job as head of covert action, terrorism, or whatever. So he was left in place. He's a very interesting guy, and he made no bones about his happiness at what happened. Now, when you're happy about 133 teenage kids at a concert being obliterated, they're still peeling skin off the walls of that concert hall, then there's something wrong with you. And when Putin and his investigators learned that Budanov was behind this, perhaps with the cooperation of people like Nuland, I would not sell Budanov any life insurance at all. Okay. One last thing. It was very odd when Nuland appeared in Kiev to referee this dispute that was hot and heavy about 5 weeks ago. Really, really bad. Zelensky, Zaluzhny, you're fired. No, I'm not fired. Yes, you are. No, I'm not. Budanov, you're going to be head of the armed forces. I thought about it. No, I'm not going to. Sirsky, what about you? Okay, yeah, I'll do whatever you want. So Sirsky's given the job. It was bizarre, okay? Now, after all that, after Nuland, who's pretty much the imperial wizard here, she's the director of all this, right? She says, all right, you got it straight now? So Zelensky is still our man, right? You got that? Okay. Zaluzhny, you go to London after 3 days of a grace period. Sirsky, you're ahead of it. And Budanov, we need you right where we are. After all that, as she's on her way to the airport, she stops outside the premises of the Zelensky compound and does an impromptu interview, amateur one. Her staff must have done it, where she say, I just want to say, says Victoria Nuland, that Mr. Putin is going to be in for some nasty surprises on the battlefield pretty soon, okay? Now, who else said nasty surprises for Putin? Well, a fellow named Bogdanov said the same words. So the Russians are pretty meticulous in investigating these things. As I said, they have the 4 perpetrators. They should be able to get to the bottom of this without having to gild the lily. And when they do, I think that they're not going to respond in kind. The Russians don't do terrorism, okay? That may sound strange to Americans, but what we can expect from Russia is the kinds of things that they did last night by bombing and destroying one of the huge intelligence installations in Ukraine. And they will just keep on bombing and keep on attriting Ukrainian forces and not be distracted by these things. Meanwhile, they'll make a big case out of what they find in their findings. And when you look at all this stuff that happens, and when you look at the people that are involved in these escapades, and I have the destruction of those pipelines under the Baltic, Nord Stream 1 and 2, also in mind. Putin knows this game. He, I think, was more an analyst than an operator, but you sit together with the operators, you know how this game is played. And I think his idea is that Biden is probably out of the equation here. It may be that Jake Sullivan knows chapter and verse. He, after all, is the guy who runs the intelligence services because he's the national security advisor, and they report to the president through him, through Jacob Sullivan. So there are friends of mine that already put their finger on on Sullivan's thing that has all the fingerprints of Sullivan, and he's been responsible for things like this. And worse still, from my point of view, and from his, he is probably the intellectual author of Russiagate. He was Hillary Clinton's main campaign advisor, and when she went really into trouble with those leaked emails from the Democratic National Committee. He figured out, oh, we'll blame it on the Russians. And now it's not only clear to us who saw it from the beginning, but through court documents that always manufactured. It's documentary evidence now. It's testimony under sworn oath that this was all manufactured first and foremost by Hillary Clinton's right man, whose name is Jacob Sullivan. The reason I mention that is just to reiterate what I've said before. Sullivan, Blinken, they have a personal stake in this, as does not only Hunter Biden, but his dad. If that other guy wins, that other guy with the red hair, they are in trouble deep. And many wars have started on less in terms of personal commitments that have to be protected. So I hope I'm wrong on that, but I think that the Sullivan and Blinken could be responsible for a lot of this, Sullivan in particular, and that if push comes to shove, and it looks like we're suffering a major defeat, that is we, the collective West, NATO, US, Ukraine, in Ukraine, then they might be tempted to go full bore and even use low yield nuclear weapons just to kind of get the thing stopped until they could have an election in November. Would the American people object to that? My God, I hope they would, but I'm not sure they would, because they are brainwashed into thinking that Putin has two horns, that he's either the devil or Hitler himself reincarnated. So that's the sad thing. The mainstream media has deceived Americans into thinking, and might even persuade most Americans. Well, you got to do what you got to do. Russians, if they don't stop in Ukraine, they'll go to Poland and they'll go to the Baltics, and before you know it, they'll be on the English Channel. Americans believe that. It's what the British call bollocks or rubbish. Okay, there's no proof of that. And just to finish that thought, how can I be so confident that there's no proof that the Russians don't intend to go take the whole of Ukraine and then take over Poland or the Baltics? Okay, I know because there's past precedent for this. Not something I know from 50, 60 years ago, something I know from 2 years ago. 2 years ago, 6 weeks after the Russian invasion of Ukraine, they stopped. They negotiated with their Ukrainian opposite numbers, first in Belarus and then in Turkey. We have all kinds of confirmation of this. And they reached a deal. Ukrainians decided that, okay, they didn't really need to be a member of NATO. We could talk about Crimea and the Donbass later, but let's stop fighting and let's realize that Ukraine has to be, as its constitution provides, neutral. That was signed, well, initial, okay, until Zelensky showed it to his American and British colleagues. They put the kibosh on it. Now, how do I know that? Because the lead Ukrainian negotiator has said that chapter and verse. Okay, it's not been much in the US media, but he negotiated things. That's my initial on that thing. Yeah, they agreed not to become part of NATO. And then the British and the Americans said, no, look, if you buy that thing, we're not going to support you. We're not going to give you lots of money. We're not going to give you lots of weapons. Just stay with us, and we'll stay with you for as long as it takes. Right. So Zelensky made a really bad choice there. He decided that he'd go with us for as long as it takes. And once again, it was clear. This shows the paucity of real reporting. Back in March and April of 2 years ago, 2022, the stories appeared in Ukrainskaya Pravda, okay? The chief Ukrainian newspaper. Exactly what happened, that there was a deal initial and that Boris Johnson in the US said no, and so Zelensky said no, and the war began in earnest, okay? So what am I saying here? I'm saying that, this was not a secret to those of us who follow the basic media, including official Ukrainskaya Pravda, for God's sake. And now it's in testimony from the principal negotiators, namely this fellow that is not a dissident. He's actually head of the faction of Zelensky's party in the parliament there in Kiev. So Haramia is his name. So I guess it's a long-winded way of saying, I probably said it before, that my evidence as to whether Putin will stop after he takes Ukraine, you take Poland, the Baltics, and then go to the English Channel. Well, my evidence that that's not true is because 2 years ago, he did stop. Remember? He had surrounded Kiev pretty much. Most people think that he's met with such resistance that he gave up, and that gave the West a confidence that it shouldn't have had. But he did stop, and he stopped precisely at the time when these agreements were being reached as a goodwill gesture. But you won't find that in any mainstream media in the United States. And therein lies a very, very big problem, Nima, as you know.
There is a speed bump on the front. There is a speed bump on the front.